Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's American Community Media Weekly National Briefing. I'm Pilar Marrero, American Community Media's Associate Editor and your moderator for today. I also co-produce these weekly national briefings with my colleague, Sunita Sorachi. As Latinos face rising discrimination with even citizens targeted by masked agents and deportations, Puerto Rican superstar Bad Bunny has emerged as a voice of cultural resistance. Through his music and pride in Puerto Rican identity, he has uplifted his island and community, inspiring and benefiting the island's economy during a recent 30-day residency there. Out of concern for ICE targeting, he left the US off his last world tour. Yet next year, he'll take the biggest American stage, the Super Bowl halftime show. And he's challenged audiences to learn Spanish by then. If you follow social media, you should be probably seeing all the memes and all the TikToks about this topic right now. While other Latin artists like Peso Pluma, Becky G, Don Omar, Ivan Cornejo, and Nezza, and many others support immigrant causes, Bad Bunny is considered by many to be the biggest music star in the world, and he has a global platform. His willingness to use it makes him a defining figure in this moment. We ask reporters to enter questions in the chat, and we will address as many as we can during the event. Our panelists are Julio Ricardo Varela, editor of the Latino newsletter. Antonio Mejias Rentas is a veteran entertainment journalist, formerly of La Opinión and Boyle Heights Beat editor. And Frances Negron Muntaner, award-winning filmmaker, writer, and scholar, professor at Columbia University, author of Boricua Pop, Puerto Ricans, and the Latinization of American Culture, among many other books. So let's go right in, guys. This question is for all of you, whoever wants to jump. Bad Bunny has been called the biggest music star in the world, yet he centers Puerto Rico, sings in Spanish, and doesn't tailor his art to the US mainstream. What does that say about the Latino identity, where the Latino identity stands today in the middle of a rising climate of discrimination and crisis?
Well, in the past, I think that for Latino art, Latino artists have been successful in the U.S. for about a century, maybe more. And during the 80s and 90s, we saw the phenomenon called a crossover, which is a way that Latino artists, the way to success in achieving mainstream support was by recording in English. And so we saw a bunch of artists having bilingual or English language records. And that is obviously not necessary anymore. But Bad Bunny is not the first or only artist to record only in Spanish. In fact, most of the artists in that genre, in trap and reggaeton, their music has always been recorded in Spanish. Um, but I think in the case of Bad Bunny, given today's political climate, we're looking at the use of Spanish as a tool of resistance, which it very well may be. Speaking Spanish, after all, is one of the ways that the Supreme Court has said that it's okay for ICE agents to identify the undocumented by their use of language. So at that level, using Spanish by residents is now seen as a form of resistance. But again, Bad Bunny is not the first artist to do that, and many artists have done that throughout their career. I can think of Ruben Blades, never recorded in Spanish. Residente has never recorded in Spanish. So, the fact that Bad Bunny is so successful, has achieved so much in his career, in his short career, makes it more apparent. But it's not different. It's just more obvious.
What else?
Yeah.
Julio?
No, go ahead.
Francis?
No, go ahead, Julio.
Whoever.
Okay. It's very packed. Your question has a lot of layers. We can go at it in different ways. I concur that we should see Bad Bunny's success as part of a long history I see a lot of coverage that singles him out as unique or a genius or this type of framing. I think that's not that helpful to understanding why we are in this juncture. And some of the threads that I would open up for reporting would be the role demographic changes in the US that correlate with young people. So there's a proportionally speaking, there's a lot of young people and young people drive the market for advertisers. We should also look at that Latino diaspora. Right now, I'm in Madrid, and a third of the population of Madrid is foreign born, and a big portion of that are people from Latin America. In fact, I go to work a few times a week to a neighborhood where it's a huge mural of Carol G. you know. Bad Bunny can project himself globally in part because there are demographic changes in the US, which beams it out, but also because there are migrations of Spanish speakers elsewhere in the world. And also because of shifts in technology are very important. If we compare the salsa stars of the 70s, the conditions that they worked in with the conditions Bad Bunny is working with, there's so many differences. One is the ability of an artist to communicate with an audience without that much intermediation. There is mediation, but consider, for instance, that Calle 13 dropped their first hit directly to the audience through the internet. Those were things that were not available to salseros. They can keep more of their money. They have become a lot more savvy, so they amass a certain type of economic power, and as a brand, they have more agency than prior generations. So if we put all those together and relate them, we can start seeing how is it possible that out of that long history of struggle to get heard and to have more say and agency of what you're offering, someone like Bad Bunny emerged. And then I guess the other thread I would say is that it seems to me that the cultural capitals are shifting. There was a period where there's like Hollywood or there's New York. I mean, there's these places where they're correlated and co-equated with the maximum cultural production in the world. But that's clearly changing. You can have a superstar coming out of any number of places right now. And Puerto Rico, people ask why Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico is a colony. It doesn't have as many millions of people as other places. Its infrastructure is also not as developed as other places. Yet it sits culturally, and when we get to that, it sits culturally at the crossroads of things. So not only do you have a long history of Caribbean music that people can draw from, but you also have a group of people that are exposed to the world in a particular way that makes it very current to the moment. And later we can talk a little bit about why a song in Spanish about belonging can resonate in countries where no one speaks Spanish.
Interesting.
Yeah. First of all, just repping, that's my uniform. I wear it pretty much every day up here. I'm in the Boston area, but like Francis, fellow Boricua. None of this surprises me. And I think to what Antonio and Francis have both said in terms of this sort of quest for representation and being part of this fabric, whatever the quote unquote mainstream is, there's been a path, right? And we have to recognize those that came before us. I love the fact that Francis talked about, the salseros of the 70s. I mean, Fania All-Stars, right? Like, playing in Zaire. This is nothing new, right? I think, but this is where I want to step back because, and there's plenty of people, and I don't want to speak for my fellow panelists or you, Pilar, but we all saw this coming in a good way, right? Antonio mentions the 80s and the 90s. I'm a Gen X kid. We were talking about the Latin, takeover of American culture when Ricky Martin got on stage at the Grammys during the World Cup and just kind of, best live performance in Grammy history. And, I can tell you why, right? And we're more than happy to debate that. So Bad Bunny is taking advantage of the moment. All these predictions of US Latinos finally becoming a powerful number. Also, this notion of Puerto Rico always being part of the cultural landscape. All these factors are coming together. And now you have this, there's no other way to say it, this genius artist who probably started with music that none of the people, I'm from the older generation, and early Bad Bunny, it took me a while, and I'm a punk rocker, right? Now it's like, you know, my tias are like, hey, did you listen to the new Bad Bunny album? And you're like, what? So there's
Wow.
something deeper here that he is so savvy and so smart to understand the moment and his presence in the moment. And what we're witnessing is nothing different than, say, Prince or Michael Jackson or James Brown or Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra. Like all these moments in sort of global pop culture, like the Beatles. This is the moment. And Bad Bunny has become that moment. And the reason why it's so deep, it's because the reaction against him has been so strong. So I love, pop culture defines global culture. And we are like everything that we've worked for, whether as a journalist or anyone here, in my 30 years of doing this, like I'm really excited because all these issues that we've talked about are finally coming to the mainstream. So
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Francis, Antonio, Julio. I saw you going like this, guys. Do you have anything to say back to?
I completely agree with Francis's take on the fact that it's today's the way that the music industry has developed, has worked to the benefit of artists like today's artists like Bad Bunny. I mean, I want to fantasize about what Hector Lavoe would have been to the world had he had social media, digital technology, etc. To today. So yeah, that's why I was done. I was thinking about the salsa phenomenon the whole time.
I'd like to say something about, I'm writing about Buddy. I haven't published anything, but I'm already writing. And one of the things that I note is that Bad Bunny has had a bit of an arc. We haven't had the same Bad Bunny all the time.
Yes.
We should have at least 3 Bad Bunnies. And I would say it's, and I think we will talk a bit about this a little later. It's the cultural nationalist Bad Bunny that's been able to amplify how many people feel in Puerto Rico. That happens to be like how many people feel in other parts of the world, because some of these tensions are happening in various parts. For instance, when Bad Bunny talks about mass tourism,
mhm.
talks about the cost of living, or he talks about, I don't want to be expelled from my neighborhood because this is happening, neoliberal capital is taking over the entire housing stock for, derivatives and what have you. When he's talking about those processes, forced migration, or the feeling of forced migration, is actually resonating worldwide, because these transformations and these struggles are happening in many parts of the world. And I'm not sure he was completely aware of this. So I'm not sure if it's something he's masterminded, to the T, but kind of a dialogue that has been happening between what he's offering, how people respond, and in a kind of a learning process, dialogic a bit. At least when you look at his trajectory closely, you see that there's been un tanteo too. So for instance, one of the things that the right is really upset about, and I see it all over social media, is that he wore a dress for a photo shoot. And we don't want these things for children to see them.
Yeah.
But that's not the Bad Bunny of the residency.
Right.
No.
In
No.
fact, Bad Bunny of the residency is very traditional Puerto Rican masculinity.
Yep.
And then I guess the other thing I wanted to say, there's a scholar called Brian Herrera who has a great book about the ways that Latino performers in American cultural history come in and out as it was cyclical. So the cycle goes, there's a huge artist, everybody's excited about it, then that artist eventually becomes a parody, and then everybody forgets Latino artists exist until the next cycle. So one of the questions that I have is whether these transformations that we're talking about, that are technological, economic, politically, the fact that there's multiple focus of culture, that there's less hegemony of certain places, means that Latin numbers is over. That in fact, Bad Bunny represents a shift that's structural. That I'm not sure yet.
Yes.
Which is funny because
I will be 100% sure with that, Francis, that we have passed that corner. And like and I will double down on that until I stop writing or stop producing or stop whatever I'm doing on the journalism front. Everything, at least from my career and what I've seen in terms of representation and fighting for it and saying like this is something for the next wave. Like when I would say like 69 million in when I was in 1990 as a young editor and being like there'll be 70 million Latinos in 2030, people would be like, that is 40 years away. We are here. And everything that we've predicted has happened. So that when you mention the demographics, that Bad Bunny is a product of where we are at. And the last thing I'll say before there's other questions, Pilar, is that, and what is incredibly just what I love about it is that you can be deeply Puerto Rican and also be a strong ally to Latino communities and actually be both. Because one of the things that's fascinating me about this entire story is that there's so many think pieces about like he's representing US Latino communities. And you're like, whoa, but you know, have you seen what he said about Puerto Rico? Have you seen what about the colonial relationship? Like, let's not make all these conclusions where it's like, well, he's an American like us. It's like, you haven't seen the residency. So that complexity to be able to live in all those worlds and still see this elevation, and then finally to get to the pinnacle of American pop culture capitalism in the Super Bowl. Like, you're going to be in the Super Bowl. Like, that's, I can go all day. So
All right.
more
Well,
questions, please.
Well,
okay.
go back to the
guys,
capitalism at some point later.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, we should go back to
All
that.
right. Okay. So I don't know if you saw this, there's this petition going around. People are signing it to, to get the Super Bowl, get the NFL to take him out of stage and put some 70-year-old country guy, I don't know, remember his name. There's a lot of resistance in some parts of the country, in the pro-Trump, I guess. So there's one question in the chat by Henrietta Burrows. I'm going to read it in the interest of time. She says, in spite of his popularity, there is still considerable opposition to him playing in America. Well, he plays in America all the time to begin with. Do you foresee any possibility of injunction, lawsuits, etc., to prevent him from playing in the U.S.? Also, considering he will be singing in Spanish and the U.S. attempt to make English the official language, explain, if you can, the thinking behind this invitation to be the feature entertainer at the Super Bowl. This will be fun.
The NFL wants to make money. The NFL needs to diversify audiences. The NFL is a global sports league. The NFL is already playing in Mexico and Europe and other places. The NFL wants to make money.
Right.
Let's just be honest. And who is one of the biggest grossing money makers in the music industry with billions and billions and billions and billions of streams? By far. So, I don't see a lot of questions about when Kendrick Lamar was here last year. You know what I'm saying? In the sense it's like, but the reality is you could say what you want about like what it represents, but this comes down to 29 mostly white owners who want to make billions of dollars and want to associate themselves with the best global brand in music right now because they realize that they they need diverse audiences. They need global audiences to fill their coffers because they want to be a global sports league on the same level as, like, you look at the Premier League or you look at the World Cup. And anyone who thinks that there's like sort of like a good intention here, it's like, no, the NFL wants to make money.
Of course.
And so does NBC, and so does anyone. So I know that sounds very simplistic, but like, I don't see a lot of injunctions when billionaires want to make money. And that speaks to a deeper issue that I know Francis wants to talk about, but that's the answer I'm going to give.
All right.
I think that's right. I mean, I wrote about the 2020 Super Bowl halftime by J-Lo and Shakira. So I did a bit of a dive into the NFL decision making. And what I just want to add to what you said is that on top of the obvious thing that the NFL wants to make money, the part of globalization is very important because that's happening. I mean, it's always American entertainment, to put it in that way, has always had a global dimension. But the more competition there is to American products in the world, including entertainment products, the more necessary is that even America's game, which historically has been played mostly in the United States and not abroad, becomes something that is followed all over the world. So in other words, the American audience is not sufficient anymore. And I think that follows the general trend of everything else, including Hollywood studios, Netflix, etc. And I just to say that about the response from some parts of the public, in my piece about the 2020 Super Bowl, I found that Shakira and J-Lo's performance received the second highest number of complaints in the history of the halftime. The first was Janet Jackson's halftime, and I read every single one of these complaints. And the piece is called "No Singing about Butts in Spanish," because that was literally what one person said in a complaint. Like, they did not want to see people singing about butts in Spanish. And although Shakira and Jennifer Lopez did not sing all of their sets in Spanish, they did sing some Spanish and did include salsa, champeta, different genres that are Latin American or Latino and Latino. And so in that sense, what's happening now to me is just the similar dynamic, but a much more intensified context. And the intensification is, on the one hand, Bad Bunny's assertion, I'm going to do it all in Spanish. At the same time that the state has a campaign of expulsion of Latinos from the country, which has given people the license to not wait to the halftime to start writing complaints to the FCC, but start their complaints beforehand in an attempt to discredit what they perceive to be an affront. But the major arguments that we read today about why people don't want Bad Bunny in the Super Bowl, I read them already. So I would say that what's different now is it's just a lot more intense because the politics are considerably more complicated and difficult.
I'd like to just
I'm
quickly.
sorry, I was muted. Yeah, go ahead.
A quick reminder that artists who perform at the Super Bowl do not get paid. It's not a paid gig for them, but it's really a publicity opportunity for them. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and predict that Bad Bunny is going to make a major announcement at the Super Bowl in February. Is it the ticket sales for his impending U.S. tour? Who knows?
Huh. Interesting. Although I read that he was going to also be wearing certain clothes that he produces, and that will be like a big publicity. I don't know. So there's a question here in the chat by Cesar Newcomb. He's from, I think, Filipino News. He says, Bad Bunny now has become one of the symbol of immigrants. Is that true? Has he become a symbol? I mean, Puerto Ricans are not immigrants, but he is taking a stance. Can we
I think he's
say
a symbol.
that?
I think it's a symbol of what he said in the piece that Susie Exposito wrote that talked about, like, in the German magazine where he said, "Why are you not having concerts in, stateside US places?" And he's like, "I don't want ICE at my concerts because a lot of my fans, like, I want them to be safe." Not that there weren't ICE agent, there are ICE agents in Puerto Rico, and there's plenty of actions that are happening in Puerto Rico that no one's talking about. So like, so I think we get into a slippery slope when we try to paint Bad Bunny across all these broad strokes. And in the sense is that I think what Bad Bunny has become is just, and I think it's already been mentioned, Antonio and Francis have both said, and so you, Pilar, is this symbol of like a resistance about like how do Latino communities in the United States, like who are they seeking? You know what I mean? Like who are their symbols? And has Bad Bunny filled some of that void? Absolutely. But I also think that if you flip that from the Puerto Rican aspect of it, I think he's hit deeper in Puerto Rico or in the diasporic Puerto Rico relationship, wherever we are. We're across the ocean today, Francis, but I think not many people are talking about that and are trying to put Bad Bunny in a place where it's like, well, you're the symbol of immigrants. And I'm like, I don't really think that that's 100% like, at least as journalists, I feel like that's too simplistic of a take. And I would urge, as a Puerto Rican journalist, I would urge my fellow colleagues to begin to explore what I have always felt was a deeply underreported issue in American and world journalism is the issue of Puerto Rico. I've been writing about Puerto Rico since 2005. And now, people are asking me really good questions about Puerto Rico because of Bad Bunny. So Bad Bunny has made Puerto Rico cool to cover. So I kind of would encourage to go down that angle and not necessarily always say like, well, he is the symbol of immigration resistance or whatever, immigrant enforcement resistance in the United. No, I'm not saying he's not, but there's so much more to it.
I have to say, first of all, I do consider myself an immigrant. I'm Puerto Rican who's lived in the United States for over 40 years, and I still see myself as an immigrant. But I don't think Bad Bunny is representative of an immigrant cause in any way. I mean, I think that Bad Bunny stands more for national identity, for Puerto Rican identity and Puerto Rican sovereignty, not necessarily immigration. And since Julio brought up the Susie Exposito interview, which I loved, Susie's done a great job of presenting Bad Bunny to the U.S. audience. But the idea that Bad Bunny canceled the U.S. tour because of ICE raids and that he's anti-ICE, I think it's a little exaggerated and overblown. He responded to a question. If you look at the interview, it's a Q&A, and Susie directly asked him, "Were you concerned about ICE activity at your U.S. concerts, and is that why you didn't have a U.S. tour?" Well, what else would he reply to that question? Of course, he's going to say, "Yeah, no, I was concerned about ICE." But the reality is that the the Puerto Rico residency and the strategy around it was in months in planning, and he had announced a European tour months before. So he does say in the interview that that was one of the reasons, but that there were other reasons why he decided to do the residency in Puerto Rico. A lot of it has to do with his desire to help the local economy, to boost, what's going on in Puerto Rico, to bring attention to Puerto Rico, which is really his. You can more than an advocate for immigration causes, you can identify him as an advocate for Puerto Rican identity and nationality.
Yeah, well, when he went on SNL and said, "Okay, guys, I'm going to speak in Spanish during this, I'm going to sing in Spanish, and you have 4 months to learn." The internet right now, TikTok, Instagram, is full of videos of people making fun of that, and just white guys just trying to sing in Spanish. It's kind of interesting, and some people spewing hate, of course. that seems to have hit some kind of hard. It hits something in people that they're like expressing themselves in social media like that. Don't you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that I think it's very important to, of course, say something about what an artist expresses. But I think it's equally, and sometimes more important, to figure out the reception. Like, why are different audiences receiving and what are they making of it? Bad Bunny may or may not have intended to do X, Y, or Z, or any artist for that matter, but it's received in a certain way. And in that sense, that begs the question of context. So, for instance, if he goes on a show, also an iconic show of U.S. television, and says something that is received, but it's received so differently that I think it's on us to figure out why is this audience receiving it. He said the same. We heard the same thing technically, but we didn't interpret the same thing. And I think that's it's part of I think our jobs to figure out what audiences are receiving in what way, and that raises even another big question is that part of our job is also figuring out what culture does. Not only so it's not only what I figure says, but it's what is it that someone like Bad Bunny making or acting in a certain way, what kind of effect does it have on who? And how does that effect get transformed into something else? I think those are really important questions, or to me, the most important questions from a social point of view.
Okay. There's an interesting question here. I'm going to pick it up from all the questions in the chat by Frank Blanquette. He says, one thing that stands out to me is the fact that you have US citizens having to defend themselves essentially for not looking white, being detained for not looking white, being fined for not having documents on hand that prove citizenship or legal status. This holds true for Bad Bunny's community members, Puerto Ricans who are US citizens at birth, and it's insane to me that a lot of the country does not understand that or chooses not to, but also Native American tribal citizens who also look non-white and whose first language, though less common, might not be English as well. This is almost a separate issue from the injustices being felt by our migrant and immigrant communities, Latinos and others, specifically those affected by racial profiling, but also allies. And can such unification realistically lead to change? Any comments?
In terms of the education of Americans understanding, first of all, I don't think Americans understand Puerto Rico. Let's just start there. And fellow Americans don't, right? And I think, yes, to Antonio's point, I mean, whether you say you're an immigrant or not, or it says like we're US citizens, but we're not. And the history of discrimination that we have experienced through forced migration, through bad policies that led us to all over parts of the country, cheap labor that was needed. I don't want to get too deep into the history, but those are commonalities. Like you can apply that to pretty much any immigrant Latin American community. So there is a sense of solidarity. I think the problem with this type of conversation in the grand American mainstream is that I don't see a lot of Puerto Rican voices at the table. I don't need Fox News to debate about Bad Bunny if there's no Puerto Ricans at the table. And I know Rachel Duffy Campos might be one, but I'm just saying it's like, I don't need two white dudes talking about Puerto Rico and Bad Bunny when you have no clue about Puerto Rico in the first place, right? So there's always been this, we don't belong feeling. And if you really want to get deep into like what Puerto Rico is, I would recommend people looking at like Supreme Court cases that literally say that we belong to we're not part of the United States. We belong, like we're property of the United States. We're a territory of the United States. Like that is language that is also used to describe, other ugly parts of American history. So I refuse to let American media dictate the Puerto Rico issue because they don't understand it and they never have, right? So the benefit of Bad Bunny now dominating culture is that Puerto Ricans or whoever can come in and be like, okay, you like your Bad Bunny, and like, now we're gonna break it down. Because these are the 20 things that you've missed, and you've totally not understood us at all as a people or as our relationship with the United States. I live in liberal Boston. I have tons of American liberal friends who just like, well, Puerto Ricans are American citizens. I'm like, yeah, it's so much more complicated than that. And like, you really, really need to know our history. And, and I'm done with the simplistic takes on mainstream journalism. So I urge my fellow like journalist colleagues, it's like, let's get beyond Bad Bunny takes and let's get into like the issue of what Puerto Rico, like what's going on. And especially now, since the hurricane, we've had this interest, but everyone's interested in us when bad things happen to us. But there's so many deeper stories, so many like relevant stories. And I will remind people that we are the second largest Latino population in the United States. So like we're living all over this country. You have 3 people like Antonio's like on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast. It's like this is reality. The diaspora is here. Puerto Ricans are here in this country, and we're still being like, I'm still trying to defend West Side Story stereotypes from the 50s. Okay, I got off my soapbox and I'm going to shut up now and mute myself forever.
Well,
No, not forever.
one of the important things about reporting about Puerto Rico is understanding the fact that most Puerto Ricans live in the continental United States. There's a larger population of Puerto Ricans in the 50 states than there is in the island or the archipelago, as some of us want to call it. Every time I hear one of our liberal friends or even the liberal media defend Puerto Rico with the concept that these are Puerto Rican citizens, Puerto Ricans are born U.S. citizens, I cringe because media should really be saying Puerto Ricans are citizens because they were imposed a citizenship by invasion. I mean, this invasion took place in 1898. It was about 150 years ago, and most people don't even know that this happened. So right from the bat, understanding how we became citizens is important to the discussion. The advocates of Puerto Rican independence say, I talked to some of them, told me that they think it's really important for American citizens to understand that Puerto Rico is really a colony of the United States. That's the status. That's what we should be saying, and understand that what's happening in Puerto Rico is basically due to this colonial status, and clarifying that would help a lot. Bad Bunny never identifies himself as anything but Puerto Rican. No need to say that he's an American citizen. That's not part of his narrative.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys brought that up. One thing I want to say that, Julio, I wrote something about how the awareness about Puerto Rico have actually increased dramatically since Hurricane Maria. Actually, there were surveys done that most Americans did not know Puerto Ricans were U.S. citizens until that, and that was actually partly an effect of how the press covered Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. But there's 2 kind of fine print here. One of it, that the interest in covering Puerto Rico was not really covering Puerto Rico, but criticizing the president, which Trump at the time. So therefore, the depth was limited. And the second thing that I look in there, it has to do with what Antonio was saying, is that in order to help. I think most journalists wanted to help, that aid would come in, that people would not suffer unnecessarily and the like. They used the strategy of calling Puerto Ricans American citizens. And the thinking behind that is, if we tell Americans, and this is actually studied, if you tell Americans that somebody's an American citizen, the assumption is they're going to care more. They're going to identify more and the like. The problem is that nationality and citizenship is different for millions of people in the world, not only Puerto Ricans. So I think part of what coverage can do is break that down, that U.S. citizenship is a legal relation that is the product of the colonial history that has been mentioned, while the nationality of Puerto Ricans is the product of imagining ourselves as part of a national community, whether we have a state or not. I mean, and that's where culture, which is the main theme of this conversation, is so important. Most ethno-national groups in the world do not have their own states, actually, and they're nation. So therefore, there's nation states that have multiple national groups within, and that has something to do with the question or the comment on Native Americans in the United States or indigenous people in various parts of the world. So I think part of the work that can be done is how is it that culture plays a role in a group imagining themselves as cohesive, as a nation, as an ethnic group, or as a group with a shared past, a present, and a desire for a shared future. And that's one thing that I would really accentuate, that in order to say that Bad Bunny could or can or should have an opportunity to play at the Super Bowl, it's not necessary to say he's an American citizen. It's more helpful to contextualize how is it that a figure like Bad Bunny is able to have that opportunity, and there you can get in all these layers that we are.
Yeah.
Well, if we have a question.
Yeah, I was just gonna really quick be like, but
Yeah.
it's interesting that no one has ever questioned like the American citizen, like the non-citizens that have played the Super Bowl, like Bono, the Rolling Stones, like Rihanna, so I just wanted to make that point really quick before you ask that
Well, I
question.
should say that I read all Rihanna's complaints, and they were vicious. She got a whole lot of complaints, and some of them had to do with her immigrant status. Not all of them, but some of them.
Interesting. I guess people are paying attention to Bad Bunny, and they didn't pay attention to what happened to these other artists. But there's a question in the chat, and I want to ask it. Can any of the panelists recall times in the past when white Christian nationalists spewed this much animus towards a Latinx performer?
Well, yeah. I mean, for me, finding Latino rebels, it just feels like the amount of examples that we have shared of like Latino stars who have been criticized for their accent or their Spanish, or like, I mean, perfect example. Like I cover, sports and baseball. The amount of times like ESPN would get so much crap because they decided to like, oh my God, interview a baseball player in Spanish during the World Series. Oh, wow, the world is coming to an end. The American pastime is over. When I would argue it's like without Latino ball players, there would be no baseball and it wouldn't be thriving. And, I know there might be some Dodgers fans here, but like, let's look at the case of Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who has been proud and Black and Dominican the last couple of like weeks and just playing for the Toronto Blue Jays. And, this love and this culture, like this is part of America, right? And this boils down very, very, to boil it down as like crystal clear as we can. Our demographic change, that is a reality. And there's plenty, like my former partner Maria Hinojosa used to say, demographic change. There's people that are gonna be like really, really like excited about it in the United States. And then there's people who are like, this is the end of civilized society. And guess what? This is where we are in US history. This is not the first time. It won't be the last time. but that is what's happening. And it feels much more intense because you have such a spattering of content on social media and such a sort of coordination by the right wing and, and to some extent other parts of the political spectrum. So it feels different, but it's been here. It's been here since forever. And before I turn it over to everyone else, I just want just the point about Puerto Rico's political status. I want to make it very clear as a journalist that, like, I came in when I look at Puerto Rico being misrepresented in media, it's like we don't even have a real conversation about like statehood for Puerto Rico. It is still so simplistic. Like we do not have we need to have a debate on the level of American media that begins to have to understand the complexities of what this all means, because it's not all about just like, oh well, there's independence and so I want to make that very clear, because I know there were questions in the chat about like statehood and what does it mean in American citizens, and it's like that's a different session. And
Yes.
I don't want to create the impression that like I'm only like presenting one position, because as a journalist, like I've been living this status debate, but we don't have that real conversation. So, I try to take advantage of any platform to be like, hey, fellow journalist, like, look at the complexity.
It's hard to compare intensities because the context, means of communication, the size of the community, the moment that we're living, all have their particular characteristics. So it might well be that in a certain way, in terms of scale, this might be one of, if not the most intense. However, there are moments in sports history that I think are worth to look into as to dialogue with the present. So, for instance, if you think about when the baseball leagues were starting to recruit Cuban players, there was a lot of questions about their race, and this was before racial integration. But the one that comes to mind really intensely is Jose Feliciano was the first performer to play at a sports venue. The anthem is in own personal style. And it almost ended his career. And there are clips of Jose Feliciano relating that people were breaking his records, that the radio stations refused to play his records because he was, in fact, according to this audience, demeaning the anthem. And it's hard to separate that from the fact that he was a Puerto Rican performer, using his own expressive repertoire to sing the anthem. So I think for that moment, that was, a parallel of intensity, where an artist's career was almost destroyed because he dared to say, I can also sing the anthem in my way. And a lot of people felt that was literally, desacralizing the anthem.
I was going to say, I don't personally don't remember an instance of an artist being shunned for using Spanish in any way close to what's happening now with Bad Bunny. But I think, as Francis said, that has a lot to do with the way we communicate today, the role that social media plays today, and how loud these comments have become. But that's not to say that there hasn't been a feeling against the use of Spanish. And I can tell you that as a journalist who's worked in Spanish all of my career, when I was entertainment editor at La Opinión, I felt undermined by my own colleagues who were working in English. Some of them felt that the work that we were doing was less important and of less quality than
yeah.
what was happening in with our English language counterparts. And
Oh, yeah.
that was a reality that I lived
Truth.
for
That's
decades.
I
truth.
felt that. I felt that all the time. Believe me.
Right. And that's why that's why this moment in the Super Bowl feels so empowering, because this notion of Spanish is not good enough, right? This feeling that we all, and that I feel that, Antonio, like that's true, and it's very true in the journalism industry still, right?
Mhm.
But that notion of why can't you just give us this moment? It's the Super Bowl. I understand the Super Bowl has issues, but like, if we really think about it, how many global singular cultural moments happen? You know, the Olympics, World Cup, Super Bowl, pretty much. Probably all sporting events. Like, let's be real. You know, like, so that's what I think Bad Bunny, that's what it means. It's like we belong, we've been here. Like it does get back to this sort of like belonging aspect of it that has, and say what you want, has really hit home with the younger generation of Latinos and Latinas, are like who are probably experiencing this for the first time. Like I'm a grizzled veteran, so you know and Francis 1968 World Series, like what a great example. I've talked to Jose about like it almost ended his career, and the amount of vitriol that you see in the moment. I would encourage people to go to the YouTube and hear it. You can hear it, you can see it, and this was a Puerto Rican artist who was like, this is the national anthem and this is the way I want to interpret it, right? And um so I do think like that notion of what Bad Bunny can do to uplift is just this ability to be like, hey, you're gonna go down this narrative and call us this or paint us in this picture. No, 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 no. We got this global star, right? We got this global star and we have the stage of the Super Bowl. So you don't have to watch it and you're gonna miss out on the commercials and everything. Not my problem. No te preocupe, because we're gonna watch it. And I will guarantee you that when the NFL like maybe looks the next day and goes, wow, Latinos like really like football. I mean, like I really think like going back to the business aspect, like they need to diversify audiences and they want to attach themselves to someone that's going to draw in new audiences. So I'm very hopeful.
You're making me think of two things. One is that we haven't really talked much about it today, but it's one of those questions that are key. Is like the ways that the U.S. imagine who is an American, who is a Latino, and what are the margins. So I think that's a question that's always worth asking. Like, why is it that not so much Bad Bunny? We already covered the national politics of that. But other performers that have received attacks, and some of which have been born in the U.S. Or raised in the U.S. But the second thing I think is worth covering or diving deep in coverage is the history of Spanish and Latinos. Because I'm thinking about, as we might know, in Puerto Rico, when the U.S. invaded, one of the first things that they did was change policies around language. And there were many policies that were tried, and one of them was as absurd as having teachers that didn't know English teach English. So, and this is very complex, and it's the way that Spanish became in Puerto Rico a symbol of resistance to U.S. rule. And I say it's complex because the ones that crafted this idea were the Creole elites. And if you look at the debates around bilingualism or teaching English in Puerto Rico, you're going to see that many people in Puerto Rico want to learn English because it's tied to economic advancement. So when we think about Bad Bunny affirming Spanish in the Puerto Rican context or in the US context, there's more than one level and layer to this. And there's the US history of Spanish. But think about it during the 60s. The walkouts of LA by mostly Mexican American students was partly because they were punished for speaking, physically punished for speaking Spanish in school. And if you were Latino, Spanish speaker, you often were tracked into, we were talking about this earlier, into the classes that were destined not, that you were never going to go to college. And in fact, I was a student in the 70s in New York City. And when I arrived, I didn't speak English. I was 9 years old. And I already had a social worker. I already had all these infrastructure for not to succeed. I had, I guess, it so happened my parents and my mother in particular was a linguist, and she fought back some of these policies that were in fact tracking me to not succeed in school, right? So I think when we're contextualizing Bad Bunny's assertion of Spanish, I think we need to look at the history of Spanish in Puerto Rico, both how it could be a symbol of resistance, but also how it could not be a symbol of resistance, depends who's wielding it, in what context. Look at the U.S. History of this as well, and consider that Latinos don't all speak Spanish as a native tongue. So it has its own colonial history as well. So yeah, I think context is very important to make sense of what an affirmation of you have 4 months to learn might mean for different audiences.
And I
So,
think that as we consider the importance of Spanish in the Bad Bunny story, I think it's important for media outlets, especially ethnic media outlets, to consider language and use of language in their reporting. I think that you'll find a mine of great stories centered about language and artists. I hope that this will lead us to the exposure in media of great artists performing in their native languages in the US. I know there are a lot of them in Los Angeles, Vietnamese, Korean, Filipino artists. And also I have to add in, go Dodgers, that that language in sports and especially in baseball has such an important story that would lead us into another 2 hour discussion, which I
yes.
think is fascinating. But yeah, I think that there are great stories to be told about language in the U.S.
You know, you're
So,
reminding me of Roberto Clemente
mhm.
struggle to not be called Bobby. You know, he was constantly
Oh,
being called Bobby, which was a word to anglicize him, but also diminish him, like little. And he would often push back and say Roberto. So that's an instance of where language use is playing a role in a power relation, which is critical to figure out what does it mean.
so we have 2 minutes to go. Short, 20-second, 30-second. Take us to Sunday, February 8, 2026, the Super Bowl. What do you expect from this performance? What do you expect to be the performance like? What do you expect to be the reactions to it? Quickly, like we don't have a lot of time.
One of the things that I often miss in conversations about Bad Bunny is the fact that this is an extraordinary artist. This is a very talented young man who is doing really great stuff, putting out really great songs, and I expect to see a great show. I'm not a big fan of the Super Bowl or Super Bowl shows for that matter, but I'm going to be watching, and I'm excited to for what I expect to see at that show.
You know,
Francis?
I have some questions about the residency, the way it was assembled, and it's my job to have questions, so I think that's fine. But I expect that Bad Bunny and his team are going to try to change what a halftime can be. I think
So
they're going to go in there to use that platform to showcase how different, how richer, how more expansive that stage can be. So I expect people to be blown away one way or another, depending how they feel about it.
we're blown up.
I
Julio.
yeah, really quick. Yeah, I love the Super Bowl. I love Super Bowl halftime shows. I've been watching the Super Bowl since I was like 4 years old. So I have my love hate relationship with the Super Bowl. But anyway, um, and I'm also rooting for the Dodgers now that the Red Sox are out. But I will say we might see the greatest like example of like making Puerto Rican history and the Puerto Rican narrative front and center in a way that I hope the entire world goes and searches all the references that he's going to make and all the connections, and hopefully we become a more informed society about a part of this country that is so misunderstood.
This has been so fun and informative and deep. I thank you, my friends, Antonio and Julio and Francis. It was nice to meet you. And I appreciate you taking the time to have this freewheeling discussion. I loved it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank